and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This right here is a Little Blue Book. It is Little Blue Book number 727, and it is titled The Psychology of the Affections, written by Vance Randolph, copyright 1924. Now this is part 3, so we'll start off at the bottom of page, looks like page 30. So, here we go. Feeling as an attribute of sensation. One would think from reading Titchener that the so-called quail theory was rather widely held. He says, many psychologists, as we know, have looked upon affection not as an elementary process, coordinate with sensation, but as an attribute of sensation. They speak of Golfiston, affective tone, feeling tone, algedonic quality. However, I have been able to find only 4 writers, Wundt, Marshall, Ziehen, and Stout, who have defended this hypothesis, and feel safe in saying that it is not commonly held at present. Marshall, in his anxiety to refute all sensory theories, goes so far as to deny the specific sensory nature of pain, and suggests that Goldscheider's results were influenced by his bias in favor of the theory of specific energies. He quotes Blix to the effect that there are 3 specific kinds of nerve apparatus in the skin, one for heat, one for cold, and one for pressure. For the sense of pain, there are no specific organs proven in the skin. Although Marshall specifically and repeatedly denies the pleasantness and unpleasantness are sensational, I cannot see that he makes any real distinction between unpleasantness and the sensation of pain, unless the mere statement that pleasantness and unpleasantness are never the direct, but may be the indirect, results of mechanical stimulation is regarded as a distinction. He formally accepts the hypothesis that pleasures and pains may be differential qualities of all mental states, of such nature that one of them must, and either of them may, under their proper conditions, belong to any element of consciousness, which clearly makes pleasure and pain the attributes of sensation, and classes them with those general qualities of which intensify is an example. Pleasure and pain are distinct qualities which may attach to any mental element. Ziehen also is the great perspiration to discredit the theories of Richet, Goldschneider, and others who regard pain as a dermal sensation. He does not recognize the existence of either special pain spots on the skin or a stimulus especially adapted in quality to cause sensations of pain. He regards pain as an emotional tone, a qualitative characteristic of sensation. There are 2 sorts of emotional tones, positive and negative, pleasant and painful. The great majority of sensations are neutral, that is, they have no feeling at all. The emotional tone of a sensation depends upon, first, the intensity of the sensation. Lights too dim or too bright are unpleasant. Second, upon the quality of the sensation. Sweet is pleasant, sour is unpleasant. He seems to be doubtful about this quality factor, and says later that a little sour is pleasant, while a great deal of sweet is unpleasant, and goes on. It is probable that the quality of sensations in general originally influences the tone of feeling only indirectly by means of their association with pleasurable ideas. Had a bug. Okay. Third, the spatial values of the sensations: smooth surfaces, pleasant, geometrical figures, and architectural designs. Fechner's golden section, etc. Fourth, the time properties of sensation. A long duration seems to dampen both positive and negative feeling tones. Certain rhythms are pleasant, and the arrangement in time of musical tones may make them pleasant or painful. Stout thought that when pleasure or pain is experienced in connection with a sensation, it is simply an attribute of the sensation. When feeling is attached to an image, however, it is due to a remnant of the feeling tone in an actual sensation or perception persisting in ideal revival. And he adds that pleasure is somehow connected with the smooth and factual process of ideational activity, while pain is associated with ideational obstruction. Wundt, as everybody knows, was one of the most vehement exponents of the affective element theory, which he defended against all comers from 1896 until his death in 1920. However, for the 16 years between the second edition of the Psychologie in 1880 and the first edition of Grundriss's Der Psychologie in 1896, he championed with equal vigor the bitterness the notion that, turning the page, with equal vigor and bitterness the notion that feeling is an attribute of sensation. In 1893, he says plainly enough that feeling is a third attribute of sensation, the two other attributes being quality and intensity. Feeling ranges between qualitative opposites, which we know as pleasantness and unpleasantness. In 1893, Kolpe's Grundriss appeared with his famous arguments against the affection as attribute doctrine. This seems to have floored Wundt and practically knocked out the attribute theory everywhere. I do not think it has ever been taken very seriously since. Anyway, in 1896 we find Wundt saying that consciousness has two elements, sensation and affection. And after 1896 we find no trace of the attribute doctrine in any of his writings. As I have said, the chief introspective arguments for the refutation of the attribute theory were formulated by Kolpe in 1893, and as far as I know, have never been improved upon. He said, in substance: 1. Feeling itself has the same attributes as sensation, quality, intensity, and duration. Feeling has no extension, but neither do many sensations. We might as well call sensation an attribute of feeling as to dub feeling an attribute of sensation. 2. The attributes of sensation are inseparable. If one of them is lacking, there is no sensation. Thus, affection cannot be regarded as an attribute of sensation, because we experience sensations in the absence of feeling, and feeling in the absence of sensation. 3. Sensation is not something which possesses its attributes of quality, intensity, extension, and duration, but it is the combination of all these characteristics. It is adequately defined by the definition of all these characteristics, and no definition is complete which leaves out one of them. But the feeling which may accompany a sensation is not necessary to the definition. It is obvious that feeling cannot be one of the attributes of sensation. Stanley in 1895 remarked that Marshall's Quale hypothesis is set upon the dangerous foundation of ignorance, viz., of the neural basis of pleasure-pain and of the causes of its variability. It is as yet disputed whether a nerve organ for pleasure-pain has been found, but if one should be generally acknowledged, the theory would be overthrown. Feeling as an element of consciousness. This view is rather widely held just now, and may be considered the orthodox conception. It is accepted, in some form or another, by Wundt, Titchener, Culp, Royce, Ebbinghaus, Angell, Calkins, Hofting, Lehmann, Ribot, Vogt, Yerkes, Scripture, Orth, Sully, Ladd, Myers, Holgenmoth, and a great many others. The system of these men differ very widely. In detail, but all are based alike on the central dogma that feelings are distinct elements of consciousness, somehow different from sensations. Wundt's latest position is, briefly, that there are two coordinate elements in consciousness, namely sensation and affection. Sensation has four attributes: quality, intensity, duration, and clearness. Sensation is objective, affection is subjective. Sensations vary between maximal differences, affections between maximal opposites. Passing through a 0 point, the last phase of the famous tri-dimensional theory made pleasantness, unpleasantness the intensity dimension, excitement, tranquility the quality dimension, and tension, relaxation the duration dimension. Pleasantness and unpleasantness depend upon the intensity of the stimulus. A moderate amount of stimulation is pleasant. Too much or too little is unpleasant. Excitement and depression depend upon the quality of the stimulus. Tension and relaxation depend upon the temporal aspects of the stimulus. As we wait and expect, we become tense, and when the expected event occurs, we relax. In other words, our sensory experience varies in degree, in kind, and in time, and every such variation corresponds with a distinct category of affection. Kolpe holds as follows: sensation qualities far outnumbering feeling qualities. Qualitative differences of feelings are so minute that language fails to name them, and even the individual can scarcely detect them. Therefore, we are forced to limit the affections to pleasantness, unpleasantness. Affections are not attributes of sensations. Affections are not sensations, for they are determined by no one sensation, no one image, nor by any one combination of sensations or of images. There's an itch there. The feelings are elemental consciousness, because no one of the attributes of feeling is dependent upon the quality of the sensation, nor upon the intensity of the sensation, nor upon the temporal or spatial characteristics of sensation. Culp refuses the criterion of subjectivity and objectivity of the feelings and sensations respectively, although he admits that the feelings are more subjective than are sensations. Feelings have three attributes: quality, intensity, and duration. Feelings vary between maximal opposites, sensations between maximal differences. Feelings cannot be imagined, or at least centrally and peripherally excited feelings do not differ introspectively. Titchener's view, in a few words, is that affection is an element of consciousness, coordinate with and different from sensation. His two most cherished arguments in support of this view are, namely, the qualitative antagonism of pleasantness and unpleasantness, and the lack of clearness in both of these qualities. Titchener suggests that sensations and feelings are descended from the same mental ancestor. Affections are mental processes that might, in more favorable circumstances, have developed into sensations. He hazards the guess that the peripheral organs of affection are the free afferent nerve endings distributed through the various tissues of the body, and he takes these free endings to represent a lower level of organic development than the specialized receptive organs of sense. Had the development been carried a bit further, pleasantness and unpleasantness might have become sensations. At this point, one may at least suggest that some of his ingenious arguments against Stumpf might be turned against him. His reply to Stumpf is, in part, pedantic and dialectical to exasperation. Royce puts forward a two-dimensional scheme of the feelings, after defining feelings as our present sensitiveness to the values of things in so far as these values are directly present to consciousness, and stating his opinions that the feeling of unpleasantness is quite different from the sensation of pain. He proceeds as follows: I venture then to advance the hypothesis that our feelings differ from one another in at least two decidedly distinct and relatively independent ways. While I am uncertain whether once three dimensions, or some still more complex account, may not prove in the end to be more acceptable, I limit my hypothesis to two relatively independent dimensions of feeling, only because at least so much variation seems very probable, while more dimensions seem less probable. In each of these two ways in which feelings can differ, I find mutual opposed kinds or antagonistic characters of feeling. First, then, feelings differ as to their pleasantness and unpleasantness. insofar as we have the pleasure-pain dimension, as it might be called, of the variation of the feelings. At the same time, feelings of restlessness or feelings of quiescence. By restlessness and quiescence, I mean a sort of antagonism easy to observe introspectively, but on the other hand rather easily confounded, as I readily admit, with those aspects of sensory experience which guide us in knowing what movements we are making. By a feeling of restlessness, I mean, however, not the sensory experience of movements that we are actually carrying out, but the feeling of that value of our experience which makes it the object of momentary discontent. By a feeling of quiescence, on the other hand, I do not mean exclusively such a feeling as is associated with the word contentment, when that word is opposed to the word discontent, because by the word contentment language has come to mean a feeling of quiescence, which is also one of pleasure, while feelings of quiescence, as I shall point out in a moment, may be relatively painful. Sully thinks that feeling is subjective while sensation is objective, and that definiteness of sensation tends to reduce feeling, while intensity of feeling tends to keep down definiteness of sensation. This is not very different from Titchener's great clearness argument. Sully says also that feeling takes a longer time for its excitation than sensation. In pathological conditions, feeling and sensation are sometimes separated, in the state called by Bow and others analgesia. Pain may be done away with and sensation retained. Again, Schiff found that in certain stages of anesthesis brought on by chloroform or ether, pain is deadened, whereas tactical sensibility to stimuli of moderate strength is unimpaired. Conversely, there is some reason to suppose that sensation may be impaired while feeling remains intact. Thus, in certain hypnotic conditions, the patient is said to turn the page. Is said to feel the sadness of blue and the gladness of yellow, though he perceives no object. Sully reduces all feeling to pleasure and pain, and takes no stock in the restless, tranquil dimension. Excitement is either pleasant or unpleasant. No known mode of excitement is absolutely colorless. Pleasure and pain are two fundamentally coordinate modes of feeling. Sully has no patience with the doctrine of Plato and the German pessimists that pleasure is negative, the mere absence of pain. This view of pleasure applies, as Aristotle in his criticism of Plato's theory remarked, only to the lower regions of bodily gratification. Here, undoubtedly, pleasure follows and depends upon a previous state of craving or appetite. In all the higher regions of affective experience, including the growing out of the activities of the special senses, the view seems in flagrant contradiction to the facts. Feeling, like sensation, has intensity, duration, and probably also extensity or volume, so far as this can be divested of all local or spatial implications. Thus, the pain of a laceration may be more or less keen, intense, more or less prolonged, and more or less massive. Feeling has no local attribute. When we are said to localize our feelings, what we really do is to localize the sensations of which the feelings are concomitants. Wohlgemuth, W-O-H-L-G-E, Wohlgemuth, M-U-T-H. Wohlgemuth, in the course of a voluminous introspective study, concludes that feeling is elemental, and that there are only two qualities, pleasure and unpleasure. The excitement, calm, and tension relaxation of want and others being reducible to cognitive factors, ideational factors, and sensational factors, the last being principally organic sensations. Pardon me. He lists the attributes of feeling as intensity, duration, intensity, and, it seems, clearness, although a feeling element is generally considerably less clear than a sensation, yet its relative clearness may vary markedly. If a feeling element is tended to as belonging to a cognitive content or as a part of a situation or complex, it is insinuated and becomes clearer. No, intensified and becomes clearer. But if an attempt is made to focus the attention upon it to the exclusion of its cognitive concomitant, the feeling element is destroyed. Concomitant. Concomitant. Wogelmuth does not regard pleasure on pleasure as different intensities of the same psychical process, but as different qualities of the feeling elements. If a feeling element changes from pleasant to unpleasant, or vice versa, this change needs not pass through the neutral or transition point. As to localization, feeling elements can often be localized. The ability to do so depends to some extent upon the attribute or the attitude of the observer towards the feeling element. He adds that he himself became aware of a marked unpleasure localized at the lower part of the thighs, just above the region of the knee joints. The ability to localize the feeling elements improves greatly with practice. And we'll stop there for part 3. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in part 4.